Kia ora everyone, my name is Lisa.arnold and I am a Massey University postgraduate environmental student and an environmental consultant at WSP in Napier. Um, Today I'm going to present to you on the impact of Cyclone Gabrielle on our stonefruit orchards here in Hawke's Bay, and this is a small case study that was part of my Massey University study. So if you have any questions at all, I apologise that I can't be here in person, but please feel free to reach out to me on my WSP email address listed there. So the questions that I hope to answer with my research, what impact did the cyclone have on our stonefruit orchards here in Hawke's Bay? How have our growers responded to the event and what management approaches have been taken? And how have stone fruit and other orchard crops been impacted by cyclones and severe weather events, both in New Zealand and internationally? And what can we learn from these? So, part of my study, I carried out a small literature review and looked at the published literature to see what had been documented here. So, just a bit of background to the Hawke's Bay stone fruit or summer fruit industry. Hawke's Bay produces a large portion of the national crop, so approximately 80% of our peaches and nectarines and 85% of our plums. We also grow quite a large area of apricots and some cherries. So the cyclone in February 2023 brought about widespread flooding and sediment or silt deposition and wind damage to our stone fruit orchards. There was an estimated 20% reduction in the growing area and a disproportionate loss of our early season fruit from the Esk and Bayview areas. So my case study looked at 5 stone fruit orchards spread out across Hawke's Bay, and these grew peaches and nectarines predominantly, also smaller areas of plums and apricots. So up the top we have 2 orchards side by side in the Esk Valley, one in Bayview, a small one in Meeanee, and quite a large block in Tomoana, totaling about 70 planted hectares all up. So I carried out qualitative interviews with growers over January and February 2024, and I asked the growers how their orchards were impacted. So what was the degree of flooding, sediment deposition and wind damage that they had observed? What did they expect their percentage of commercial loss was? So not just the percentage of tree deaths at that time, but including if whole blocks were planned to be pulled out. Have they noted any tree health concerns or interesting observations on their blocks? What management approaches had been taken so far? And what were their future plans for these blocks? So starting with the Esk Valley orchards, these blocks were obviously impacted severely. There's actually 2 orchards side by side. There were 2 different capons here, and mostly nectarine and peach. And these were subjected to very deep floodwaters, 6 to 7 metres, and sediment that almost completely buried the trees, so about 1.5 metres deep. So when I visited the block in January 2024, the photo to the left I took when standing on the rail line and looking what used to be looking down into a bit of a depression for this orchard had basically been filled in with silt, and you can see the tops of the dead trees in there. So 100% commercial losses for these blocks and no plans for the grower to return to production out here just due to the risk within that Esk Valley. Just down the road at the Bayview Orchard. This orchard was also impacted by the Esk River, where it broke its banks and undercut through the rail line at the northern side of the orchard. This resulted in flooding about 1/2 to 1 metre deep during the storm across the block, and some minor sediment, about 2 centimetres in places, and also some areas of quite deep rail gravel that had been deposited as it undercut that rail line that had to be removed as well. This orchard had pre-existing tile drainage issues in the middle of the orchard, and this exacerbated the impact of the waterlogging out here. So there were large areas in the middle of the orchard that were subjected to surface water that wasn't draining up to months, 2 to 3 months for some areas, and over the winter this basically caused large areas of trees to die off, and the growers estimated about a 15% commercial loss for these blocks. These are planned to be removed and replanted. Interestingly, the plums at this orchard fared really well. So this grower uses all Golden Queen, and Golden Queen is the standard rootstock for peach, nectarine, apricots, and plums. So the whole orchard was planted with Golden Queen peach rootstock. This rootstock is quite susceptible to waterlogging. However, the plums did really well. So the photo to the bottom left is shows an area of plums to the left next to nectarines that are not doing so well. So they're both subjected to the same waterlogging condition and the same rootstock. So plums have a bit more of a natural tolerance to waterlogging. So this is the Meeanee orchard. This is quite a small block of peaches, about 3.5 hectares. This block was also severely impacted by flooding, about 1 meter, half to 1 meter deep across the block, with moderate sediment deposition, about 10 to 15 centimeters of sediment. And the situation for this block and this whole area was that the pump on the Tutaikuri River nearby had failed, therefore the floodwater could not be pumped out of this whole area. So it was about 10 to 14 days before the council could get smaller pumps in to drain that area out. So water was sitting in this block for quite a while, and then even with the surface water drained away, that puggy sediment held that moisture around the root systems for a lot longer as well over that winter period. So these trees had really suffered. As of winter 2023, the grower thought they might be okay and started doing some pruning, but realized the block was pretty unhealthy, and they've had about 80 to 90% tree deaths when I visited in January 2024. So you can see the photo at the bottom left was when I visited, and that was the trees just before they were due to be completely pulled out. So obviously no cost had been put into that block over that spring-summer time. So 100% commercial losses here, and was planned for full removal and replanting. And the Tomoana orchard, so this is the largest orchard, about 35 hectares of planted peach and nectarines. This block was also impacted by flooding between 0.5 to 1.5 meters deep. Not much sediment really, very minor, not really anything that could be significantly measured. And the difference in this block is that the floodwaters drained away very quickly. So within 3 days of the cyclone, the surface water had drained away. So those drains towards the northeast side of the block, council operated drains were working well and did what they should have done. So that was great. And at the time that I visited in February 2024, the grower estimated less than 1% of commercial losses out here. They'd noticed some sign of some of the younger blocks potentially struggling and some wind damage to some of the young nectarine trees, but overall this block had came out pretty well. So the key findings from this study, this was a really interesting case study, as the 5 orchards that I looked at were spread out geographically across Hawke's Bay and impacted to quite varying degrees. So ranging from that less than 1% right up to 100% commercial losses. Flooding ranged between half a metre right up to 6 or 7 metres out in the Esk Valley. And sediment also ranged from very minor, about 2 centimetres, right up to 1.5 metres out in the Esk Valley. And the wind damage overall was pretty minimal. So a couple of interesting observations. As mentioned earlier, the plums fared really well despite being on Golden Queen rootstock. And the grower noticed a lot smaller fruit size for 2024, and this was quite noticeable in the market alongside other growers. And this, we are not sure if that was a result of the cyclone impacts or whether that was just a small fruit size year. So the main cause of the tree deaths for these growers was surmised to be the hypoxic soil conditions caused by waterlogging or a combination of waterlogging and deep sediment. And the rapid drainage of floodwater appears to be really critical. And this is highlighted not just for on-orchard drainage, but also the surrounding drains around our orchards that are maintained and operated by councils. Making sure that these are operating well is really key just to get that floodwater out of there as quickly as possible. And so the growers' plans for these orchards going forward, when I interviewed them in 2024, was quite a minimal remediation approach, more of a wait and see. This is because there was a bit of uncertainty around how the trees were going to fare and limitations around costs and resources. They had planned to be more diligent with their post-harvest soil testing and fertilizer applications in that coming winter 2024, and just to make sure that there wasn't any unusual deficiencies cropping up that they needed to address. They'd also planned to replant a lot of the blocks that had suffered quite badly, except for the Esk Valley blocks, which weren't returning to production. And so the second part of my study looked at a small literature review. And for this literature review, I looked at the impacts of cyclones on tree crops, both within New Zealand and internationally, to see what measures and mitigations had been taken, what had been effective, what had maybe not been so effective, and if there were any learnings for our stone fruit growers in Hawke's Bay. I also looked at the susceptibility of different rootstocks. In New Zealand, for our stone fruit growers, there's not a huge range of alternative rootstocks available, and Golden Queen is the main one that's used for peach, nectarine, plum, and apricot. So if anybody is interested in the results of that literature review and the findings, just feel free to reach out to me and I can share those. And just a quick update for spring 2025. So I was fortunate enough to get out and visit the growers at the Bayview and Meeanee blocks. So they've carried out quite a bit of replanting, which is really cool to see, just some more trees in the ground and the blocks looking really tidy. Out at Bayview, they had replanted all of the areas that were heavily impacted with that tile drainage issue. They've put a new tile drainage system in there and replanted with early nectarines to replace that lost production from the Esk Valley. They've used the Golden Queen rootstock again. As mentioned before, it's quite limited in terms of what alternative rootstocks they could consider when trying to choose something that might be more waterlogging tolerant. The Golden Queen rootstock is a solid performer for them, and they grow it themselves using local peach stones. So quite a solid rootstock choice out here. Over at the Meeanee block, they have pulled out those trees and replanted predominantly with apples, and so that was a commercial decision to put apples in here, but also partly influenced by the flood. Across the road from the Meeanee block during the flood, they observed a young apple tree block in there that had done really well despite being subjected to that same flooding and sediment deposition. So it made sense to put apples in here, and part of the block they're also using for peach rootstock nursery. Over at Tomoana, I don't have any updated photos out here, but the block has generally fared pretty well. This was the block that had the drainage water drain away really quickly within about 3 days. However, the initial commercial loss estimate of less than 1% is probably a bit higher. They've had about 3 hectares removed from this block. Particularly some of their younger blocks have struggled following the cyclone, but overall doing pretty well out here. Other than that, there haven't been too much interesting observations in terms of soil health and nutrient deficiencies. Overall, the blocks are looking pretty good. 2025 was a really good year for the growers. They found that they had good yields and good fruit size. And overall, they feel like things are getting back to normal and they're back on their feet again. So really positive to get out and see these orchards just bounce back. So thank you to everybody that helped me with this case study, all of the orchard staff involved for their time, Dr. Stephen Trello from Plant Food Research, Richard Mills and Sally Anderson from Summerfruit New Zealand, and my Massey University professor, Dr. Svetla. So thank you to everyone, and if you have any questions, feel free to flick me an email. And yeah, enjoy the rest of the symposium. Cheers.